Hello and welcome to the Serve Asia podcast, where you'll find stories, interviews and interesting discussions about how the good news of Jesus is being shared with the peoples of East Asia. I'm your host Ryan.
And I'm Kat, and today we have a special guest, Heather, who works for OMF International in social media.
And in our conversation with Heather, we talk about how we can reflect the light of Christ into the world of social media. And we also talk about how Instagram is changing the face of short-term mission and some other things as well. We really enjoyed chatting to Heather, and we also hope that you enjoy listening to this episode as well.
So today we have Heather.
Hi.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm part of OMF's international team and I look after the digital communications. So our main role really is to support and advise all our different centres that we have around the world on how to use the web and social media and other digital channels to raise awareness of OMF, of mission in East Asia, and to help mobilise people into missions involvement.
So you're doing a lot of social media from an organisational perspective, but from what I understand, you're also on social media yourself personally as well, aren't you?
I am.
So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about what it means for us as Christians. How can we represent Christ on social media? Because we know that we're supposed to represent Christ in the world, but on social media, we don't necessarily always see Christ represented well by Christians sometimes, but sometimes we do.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on what do you think it looks like for a Christian to be reflecting the light of Christ in a digital world.
Sure. I mean, I guess I don't really see it as being any different to how we represent him in any other area of our life, because social media is such a kind of integral part of life now. People are, pretty much everyone's on social media, and it's just such an accepted part of our life and our daily activities. So I think in one sense we shouldn't really kind of separate it and be like, oh, well, this is a separate thing and this is how I behave here versus how I behave in real life. And for me, it's just about, representing God's love to other people through those digital interactions as well as real interactions. One thing that I definitely think is a risk is talking about political or theological things on social media. I often, especially when there's some big political event going on or something, I'll see people having debates on social media, and to be really honest, I've never seen anything like that end well. It always ends with someone getting their feelings hurt or being offended, or a previously perfectly fine relationship between two Christians or a Christian and non-Christian, whoever it might be, getting harmed by that interaction. And I think it's because it doesn't happen face to face, probably.
Yeah, I think the solution to that is just, if you want to talk about politics, if you want to talk about theology, it has to be the right setting, and it's best to do it face to face. So something that I kind of started doing after the elections in the States was I would see people having these arguments on Facebook, and if they went to my university, I would just comment on it like, hey, I'd love to buy you a cup of coffee and talk about this. So I do think that's a good solution to issues like that.
Definitely, yeah.
I love that idea of taking it off of the digital platform into a real life scenario. But why do you think it's people find it so hard to not act normally when they're online? Because you see so many people talking to people in a way which, if it was face to face, you just know they wouldn't be talking like that, which is why going for a coffee and talking about it is so disarming, and usually you just have much more positive interactions with people when it's face to face. So why do you think it's so different when the conversation takes place digitally?
That's a really good question. So I used to work in customer service in retail years ago, and if you had a customer service interaction face to face versus on the phone, the customers behave so differently. You get them on the phone and they're so pushy, they're rude, they make it personal, versus someone face to face behaves very differently. And I think the reality is that when someone stood in front of you, you just don't have the guts to be as frank as you would have been, because you can see their reaction on their face, in their body language. You can see any offence you cause, any harm you cause, you instantly are aware of it just in that interaction being a face-to-face interaction. And I think that probably is a similar situation, yeah.
One other dynamic that I think comes into play is not only not wanting to avoid the negative things that you can cause someone, but it's also, I think, when you are face to face with someone, you see how they are actually another human being as well, and how actually, you know, they're a person, they have feelings, they have family and friends, and they have a day that you could potentially ruin if you're really rude to them. Whereas on digital or over the phone, it's so easy just basically to not see the image of God that's on someone. And so I think maybe that's something we need to be really mindful of as Christians, is that every single person that we interact with on social media, even though we can't necessarily see their faces or see their reactions in real time, we have to remember every single person is an image bearer of God, and they have dignity and value and worth, and we shouldn't be just taking it for granted by using words that we would never think to use in real life, face to face.
Definitely, yeah.
So one thing I'd love to talk about is how Instagram and social media changed the view of short-term mission. Because, so like short-term mission used to be seen, from my understanding, based off of the old OMF China Inland Mission videos that I've watched. Whenever somebody talked about going somewhere else, like going to a different country, going on their placement, whenever they were interviewed, they never talked about themselves. They only talked about Christ and the people that they were going to serve. Yeah. And I don't see that. And I see that with some people posting about their short-term trip, but most of the time it's like, come join my adventure, come live my adventure. And it's like, I mean, sure, your life with Christ can be an adventure, but because, like, I think it kind of has a negative tone because we see people traveling on Instagram, not for short-term trips, but just traveling on Instagram, making money off of Instagram just with cool photos or travel vlogs. And like, how do we make short-term mission trips not look like travel vlogs?
Yeah, definitely. I think the thing with Instagram and social media in general is that it breeds narcissism. That's inevitably part of what happens. And Instagram definitely is more of an area where that happens than, say, like Facebook or Twitter. And people end up portraying this false, perfect life. And if that's what everyone's doing when you go on your mission trip, it's inevitable that you're going to potentially do the same thing. And definitely if you search for things like #mission trip on Instagram, some of the stuff that comes up is pretty cringeworthy. And what's interesting actually is that the Serve Asia program really grew out of a place of wanting to fill needs on the mission field. So Serve Asia being OMF short-term mission program, it didn't used to exist. They just used to do what they called spot placements years ago. And that was literally a worker would say, look, we really need a dentist to come for 6 months. And they'd find a dentist and they'd go into a spot placement. And then it grew into this big program because there was so much need for short-term workers. So I think hopefully OMF have tried to stay away from this thing of, I'm going to go on a nice mission trip this summer and I'm going to go and serve people and isn't it going to be wonderful for them how I'm going to improve their life, and then I'll go home feeling warm and fuzzy and then my life will carry on. OMF really tries to avoid that kind of attitude. It's about going and serving God. It's about serving the other workers on the field. It's about growing as a Christian, growing in missions involvement, engaging with missions, and hopefully making that a long-term part of your life and part of who you are. And when we're doing social media for Serve Asia, we really, really try and reflect that. We really try and stay away from these kind of negative ideas around mission trips.
Hi guys, sorry to interrupt this episode with Heather, but I just wanted to tell you about an event that OMF is putting on in London on November the 10th. If you've ever asked a question about how you could be involved in God's global mission where you are right now, then you really need to come along to Nextgen 2018. The UK is now more multicultural than ever, and at Nextgen, we're going to be exploring how we can make the most of this opportunity. So if you have a passion for sharing the gospel, and especially for sharing it with people from East Asia, then this event is for you.
So come along and be inspired and empowered to live out the call to mission that God has placed on your life as we seek to equip the next generation of gospel workers. As I said, it will be on Saturday 10th of November in London, and it will cost you just £10. You can find out more about this event by going onto omf.org/UK/nextgen or by clicking on the link in the show notes.
What you were saying about how social media can really breed things like narcissism is a real challenge, isn't it? And it reminds me of a previous episode with Levi, where he really helpfully spoke about image or influence. Now, are you using social media to improve your image, or are you using it to influence people for good? So in light of what you just said about how Serve Asia approaches social media, about not making it about the individual's experience, but actually making it more Christ-centered, how do you think we can be more real on things like Instagram?
Sure. I mean, it's definitely worth saying we don't have all the answers and we don't get it right all the time. We're always learning. And I think that what I find really helpful is that OMF has its own guidelines for communications to help us to remember that there is a whole world out there listening to what we're saying and looking at what we're posting on social media. It's not just Christians, it's not just people who are engaged with OMF, and we really need to remember that. I think when it comes to me personally with my social media, I'm really aware of the fact that I have lots of non-Christian friends and I have lots of OMF friends, and actually on Facebook I have split my friend list up, and you can set up custom lists, and I have a list for Christians, I have a list for OMF workers, and I have a list for non-Christians. And when I have things that I want to share, I am quite specific about who I target them to, partly because some of the stuff that's done for a Christian audience, I think actually isn't always the right thing for my non-Christian friends to see, because they might not be in the right place to see that thing, and it would be much more beneficial if they saw something else I wanted to share. So I'm quite mindful of that. Obviously, Facebook is a bit more, it gives you more control in that way, and Instagram isn't quite like that. But that's definitely something that I do to try and make sure I'm getting the right messages out to the right people, in the same way that I wouldn't have a conversation in the same way with a non-Christian as I would a Christian about, for example, my short-term mission experiences.
So one thing I've noticed, and I've heard other people talk a lot about, is how let's just keep on using Instagram as an example, is how people only really tend to share the real positive part of their lives, and it creates this image that everything is great with you, that your life is sorted, and that all you do is have all of these wonderful experiences. But obviously, we know that isn't real life. But as Christians, we can fall for that trap of thinking that other people around us do have these perfect lives. So, is there a place, do you think, for sharing not just the ups but also the downs of life? And at what point do we think that oversharing is a thing? I'm not expecting any clear-cut answers, but it'd be good to have that conversation, I think.
So people share more than they have in the past because social media is always there. It's a platform where you can share stuff, but people have always chose what they wanted to share and what they didn't want to share, like in a letter or just talking to people. It's still the same on social media. You get to choose how much you want to share. You're in control of what you're saying. And I do think because it's so accessible to just share your opinions whenever, we don't really think about what we're saying. And we don't, it's kind of just a reaction to something. So a solution for that could be, if you're uneasy about sharing something, you could write it out and then just save it as a draft. And then the next day, if you still think it's funny or if you still think it's worth sharing, then you can post it.
I really like that idea. And I'm often shocked by people in positions of power, how they fall into this trap. I mean, just yesterday in the UK, it was in the press that a politician in the middle of a meeting obviously was scrolling through Twitter, saw something he thought was just a funny political cartoon, retweeted it when the meeting ended, or whenever he looked at it properly and realised it was highly offensive, and had to quickly delete it, and now is potentially going to, have to step down from being an MP because of a retweet, because he was sat in a meeting being distracted by social media. And you're just like, come on, guys. Like, how are you falling into that trap? But if someone like that can, then any of us can. And we should definitely be thinking about, what we're writing before we write it. Really, like, who's going to read this? How will it affect them?
I think it's important to think and believe that social media can be there to influence people, and it should never be impulsive.
I think one thing that what we're drawing out from this conversation is the need to actually just be real, because as people who believe the gospel, we understand that we live in a world that is full of God's gifts, but also we're in a creation that is frustrated by sin and it's broken, and so we're always living with that duality where there are great ups in life, but also there are great struggles in life. But the way in which we use social media as Christians, there probably is an appropriate way in which to reflect that reality. But then when we do talk about the good things, we can mention how we give thanks to God for those good things. But also in those hard times that we share, we can also share about the hope that we have through those hard things, and how, despite the hard things we're going through, we can still give thanks because these things are true about God, and that's not where our contentment and satisfaction and hope in this life isn't found in the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And so I guess sort of drawing it back to the short-term mission experience, which in many ways seems to have been hijacked by the Instagram travel vlog culture. We want to be more honest and real about what short-term mission is for, and how it isn't about us having this amazing traveling experience. Although you might well have that experience, that's great if you do, but actually it should be centered on Christ and a love for Christ and a passion for Christ. And actually I think that's much more satisfying, isn't it? Having a passion for him, and that's why you're going, rather than because you want to go and experience all these things in this life.
Definitely. And I think that we have to be honest that mission isn't always easy. There are really hard times, and in my experience of short-term mission, I spent 4 months in Japan. I had some really rough times. It was really hard, and there was lots of factors that played into that. But I wasn't the only one having a hard time of it. There was lots of long-term workers having a hard time of it too, and Japanese people. There's a lot of stuff going on in Japanese culture that's really sad and really broken, and in the West we often don't realise that. So what I saw that as was an opportunity to share with people who were following me on social media, or who were receiving my prayer letters, to share with them those things that they could be praying about it. And that's one of the key things that we really want to do with the Servasia Instagram and social media, is to motivate people to pray. We want them to be sometimes shocked by the things they read. If that means that they suddenly are like, wow, actually this needs my attention, this needs me to be doing something, and I can pray, like I can do that at any point. There's nothing stopping me. So yeah, if we can raise awareness of the needs on the field, if we can encourage people to pray for the country, for the workers, then that's such a great thing that can come out of social media. And it's not about that individual.
So this really all comes back to why it's important to represent Christ well in social media. The Bible tells us so many times that we need to watch what we say. We need to watch our words when we're talking to people. But obviously social media wasn't around when Jesus was walking about.
I would have loved to seen that.
Yeah. But how we need to keep in mind that our words are still words, whether we're saying it to a person or whether we're posting it online. And we shouldn't be impulsive with them. We're supposed to be wise in our words. We're supposed to be loving. And social media has that power to really hurt people by the words that we choose, or it can empower people the same way we're talking to people face to face. And we kind of just lose that disconnect on social media because we're not looking at people face to face. But it is really important to represent Christ. And we just got to remember that.
I do think it's worth saying that we can have these conversations. It's okay to engage in political debate. It's okay to engage in theological debate, because those are really important things, and we can't just sit back and ignore them. But I guess my feeling is just that it's really important that we think about it before we do it, and we think about the best way, like the most effective way of engaging in those conversations.
Yeah, because going back to what Kat said about how we use our words, ultimately the fruit of the Spirit is for all of life, isn't it? It's not just because now we have a digital world that we're engaging in. We should expect that we should demonstrate the fruit of the Spirit online as well. So when we do, if you do feel like you want to engage in a debate about a political topic or a theological topic, make sure you do it by displaying the fruit of the Spirit. Make sure you do it with self-control, and you do it with gentleness, and you're doing it with love, and you're doing it with patience, because I think also the fruit of the Spirit, if you demonstrate that through your words on social media, actually one of the things that's so hard about social media arguments is that people don't want to lose, because they sense that everyone is watching, everyone's following this latest argument that's going on, and so you don't want to be seen to be the person who's lost. Whereas actually, I think as a Christian, your goal isn't to not be the person who loses, but it's to be the person who shows grace, and who is, you're willing to have an open mind, and you're willing to admit that you're wrong, because actually your hope isn't found in the fact that you've got everything sorted and that you know all the answers. So I think it's okay to be wrong on social media as a Christian. What's important is that you demonstrate patience, love, kindness, self-control, gentleness to the person you're speaking to. And I think it's refreshing as well, because when you do see that, when you do see actual discourse, it's actually encouraging to read this.
Yeah.
And there's no misrepresentations of the other person's argument. There's a genuine conversation going on. I think that is possible, and I've seen it happen. But I want to see it more.
Definitely. No, I completely agree. I think that we just want to make sure we're honouring God, and we want to do that in all areas of our life. So let's make sure we're doing it on social media as well.
We hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode of the Serve Asia podcast. If you have any questions, feedback, or anything else, then we would love to hear from you. You can get in touch by emailing uk.podcast@omfmail.com. Alternatively, you could send us a direct message on Instagram @ServeAsiaPodcast. If you'd like to support the podcast, then do share it with anyone you know who has a heart for sharing Jesus cross-culturally. And also, a 5-star review on iTunes goes a long way as well. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode.